Alrighty, we will get started. Before we introduce our moderator, I'd like to mention a couple of housekeeping items. Real quick overview of the agenda. We'll be introducing our topic and our speaker for today. We'll have about a 30 to 40 minute presentation followed by a moderated Q&A for about 10 minutes and some final comments and announcements. I do want to mention, please submit your question on the right hand side of your screen. If you're having any technical issues, you can also use this window to get in touch with us, ask any questions you might have. And so without further ado, please welcome our moderator for today, Nicole Sholin. Nicole is a training coordinator for Petroleum Extension, which is a part of the Cockrell School of Engineering at UT Austin. So take it away.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for the second TexTalks webinar in our series. If you missed the first webinar with Dr. David Allen, the recording can be found on the Petex website at petex.utexas.edu. My name is Nicole Sholin, and I am a training coordinator at Petex. The Petroleum Extension, or Petex as it's known, is a unit of the Cockrell School of Engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. While we are headquartered at the university's campus in North Austin, our main training center is located in Houston. We also have a training center located in Odessa, Texas. The educational opportunities that we offer today range from traditional instructor-led courses, virtual courses, e-learning, and publications to match the needs and availability of those looking to learn more. I am pleased to be able to introduce one of Petex's own instructors in the Pipeline Technology Design course, Kerry Malone. Kerry and I have worked very closely over the years to educate many students in the pipeline industry. Kerry is a Senior Vice President, Projects and Operations at Contract Land Staff. Kerry's responsibilities include project management and quality control for major pipeline and electrical utility acquisition projects. Kerry served as the right-of-way project manager for the Rockies Express Pipeline and the Dakota Access Pipeline, two of the most significant pipeline projects to be undertaken in the last 20 years. Today, Kerry is going to share with us some basic information about the right-of-way phase of pipeline construction and operation support. And now I'll hand it off to you, Kerry.
Good morning. Let me make sure, can you hear me at this point?
Yes, Kerry, you're fine.
Okay, very good. Here we go. And I presume that now you can see my screen.
Yep, we're ready to go.
Very good. Well, people, I'm very, very happy to have the opportunity to speak to you today. As Nicole indicated, I've worked with the organization for quite some time now, and I would like to give you a little bit of a background on what the intention of this and some other training that we've done is, and that is to reach out to pipeline officials, especially the people in the business development area of pipelines, in the project management area for engineering of pipelines, and for the maintenance and operations management of pipeline projects. I think it's very important that you have some basic understanding of what right-of-way is, and hopefully you can come away from the presentation here today, if you don't already have it, with an understanding that you need to involve right-of-way as early as possible in your planning processes, and you can make right-of-way a very important integral part of your project process. So without further ado, let's move forward on it. The first is an explanation basically of what right-of-way is, and there are just some real basics involved in what pipeline is. We'll also talk about routing considerations, the lifespan of the pipeline and how right-of-way is involved in those, and in the very basic documents and rights and so forth that are involved in the right-of-way process. What is right-of-way? Well, it's the right of one person to do something with someone else's property. In your case, as pipeline people, it's the ability to install, maintain, and operate your pipeline on property that your company does not own. It is usually referred to as an easement, and it's an interest in the real estate, and it's not usually a license. Although there are some landowners who require that that pipelines are given an easement for a limited timeline, but typically there are permanent easements that run with the land, and the right is given and the right stays with your company or your company's anyone who might later own your company's rights. And it's the most basic asset of a pipeline company. Without the right of way, you have no place to put your pipe, and there's no way to install and operate and maintain your pipeline without the land that the pipeline is located upon. And it actually represents a monetary value to the company. It's not just a piece of land that you use and forget about. That monetary value will always exist for the pipeline easement area. That's something that your company needs to really keep in mind, especially if you ever stop operations of the pipeline. The land that the pipeline is located on still has value, and we'll talk a little more about that as we move forward. What is right of way? It involves multiple tracts of land owned by multiple people in most cases, and it's what we call one stick of the bundle of rights. And the bundle of rights, we'll go into a little more detail about that, but every property, every piece of ground in the country, in the world, has certain rights associated with it. And we'll discuss how pipeline rights of way come into play there. And here's a picture of gives you an idea of what's involved with the bundle of rights. Generally speaking, if you owned everything in your bundle of rights for a piece of property, the saying goes that you would own everything from the center of the earth to the stars above. But that's usually not the case. There are very few, if any, properties in this country where the landowner owns everything there is to do with that property. You would have some landowners that might disagree, but then they would need to take into consideration, are there deed restrictions, especially for residential areas and so forth? That's one of the sticks in your bundle of rights. Do you owe money on it? Are there mortgages or liens? Certainly, that mortgage holder has certain rights related to your property. In Texas and many other states where there's been exploration for minerals, oil and gas and other minerals, you have mineral resource issues. Do you as a property owner own the mineral rights to your property? I would say to you that in the state of Texas, the minority of property owners actually own the mineral rights to their property. So they only have limited control over what can be done on the surface or subsurface of their property because of the mineral rights. Often minerals are severed, minerals are sold, and many times you'll buy a piece of property, or a landowner will buy a piece of property and not own the mineral rights. It's a very valuable resource, a very valuable stick in that bundle of rights. Then there are easements, and we're not only talking about pipeline easements here, but also easements to do with road construction. If there's a road adjacent to the property, part of that road area has been taken from the property or sold by the property owner for the use of that road. The same thing for electric lines, for local gas distribution lines, anything that an easement might be needed for. And then there are land use restrictions that are part of that bundle of rights. What can you use or cannot, what can you not use your land for? And any place where there are zoning ordinances, that has to do with land use. So the bundle of rights, you're asking as a right-of-way, as a pipeline company, you're asking right-of-way to obtain for you a portion of that bundle of rights to allow you to install, operate, and maintain your pipeline. And right-of-way handles that aspect. As far as routing considerations go, there are judicial issues involved. Every pipeline project is regulated. You might hear some pipelines refer to themselves as unregulated lines. That is really a misnomer, because in the state of Texas, for example, the Texas Railroad Commission has jurisdiction over where you can and can locate a pipeline, depending on the type of pipe. In the federal level, you have several issues in the federal level. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission controls the construction of interstate natural gas pipelines. They also control some intrastate natural gas pipelines. In addition to the FERC, there's also the Corps of Engineers, which controls areas where you're crossing wetlands and streams and so forth. So that's very much a part of the considerations for routing the jurisdictional issues. Related to the jurisdiction of the pipeline is the issue of right of eminent domain. We'll talk a bit more about the right of eminent domain as we move forward. Environmental issues are a big consideration when routing for all the obvious reasons. Wetlands especially come into play. Routing considerations also includes constructability, and the most obvious constructability issue is that of terrain. Are you going through mountainous areas? Are you going through hilly areas? Are you going through desert areas? Is the terrain forested? So constructability always takes those issues into consideration, but also land use is a routing consideration as far as constructability goes. What is the land used for? It's a lot different crossing a farmed area or a forested area than it is open country. So that comes into play. Are there population centers along your route? Are you having to deviate your route from that straight line that all engineers love to something less than a straight line going around population areas? And it not only includes where current population is located, but where there's planned development. And public and private ownership. Is the land that you're going to be crossing tribal lands, for example? Is it land that's owned by the federal or state government, or is it owned by private landowners? Right-of-way can help determine these things for you, can work with your planners, especially during the business development phase, and determine where would be a viable route for the pipeline. There's the big question of landowner acceptance, and every area has different issues associated with that landowner acceptance. One of the major things that's happened over the last 10 to 15 years has been the involvement of social media. Social media, including not only blogs and that sort of things, but also Facebook. If you plan a project in a particular area, once it's known by the public, by anyone in the public, it's going to be out there on social media. And what can that lead to? Oftentimes, depending on the area, it can involve organized resistance to your project. The more people can communicate the fact that there's a pipeline that's going to come through, or maintenance that's going to take place, or line replacement, the more people that know about it, the more opportunity there is for organized resistance. And trust me when I tell you that attorneys watch this very closely, and they are very active many times in developing organized resistance to your project. And then there's the regional political climate. By that, think of the difference between trying to install a pipeline near Austin, Texas, versus one in, say, far west Texas. The political climate in those two regions is drastically different as far as the willingness for a pipeline to come through the area. So that's a very important issue. Right-of-way can oftentimes give you a heads up, can work with business development in letting you know some of the challenges that you may be facing in putting a pipeline in a particular area. Eminent domain we mentioned earlier, and a pipeline that is regulated typically has the right to eminent domain, and by regulated, I mean by particular agencies. If the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission issues a certificate for the project, then that project will have the right of federal eminent domain. Sometimes the companies decide to use it on the state level, but it does have the right to condemn. The same is true for approval by your state regulatory agencies. Texas Railroad Commission. Many of you may know that once a T4 certificate is issued to the project, then you probably are going to have the right to eminent domain. And what does that mean? That means that if a landowner refuses to allow you to install the pipeline, or if they refuse to sign an easement allowing you to build the pipeline on their property, you have the legal remedy to go through the court system and obtain that right to cross the property without their approval. That doesn't mean you don't have to pay for it. It doesn't mean you don't have to work in good faith. It doesn't mean you don't have to still follow all of the construction restrictions relative to environment and the other things. It just allows you as a pipeline company to install that pipeline on their property. The political climate comes into effect again there. You wouldn't think so. If your building are going to condemn under a right given to you by the state or federal government, how does the local climate, political climate affect things? Again, think of the difference between an area like Austin and an area like West Texas. Very, very different situations that you're going to find politically there as far as acceptability. You have to think of recent court actions, and this is a very big deal, and it's becoming a bigger deal all the time. What have recent condemnations, how have they gone in the area that you're looking at? Sometimes a local court or a board of commissioners will not approve your pipeline. Right-of-way can oftentimes let you know ahead of time if there have been a history of difficult court situations in a particular county. There are several areas in Texas where it's very problematic if the local jurisdiction is going to be very favorable to your pipeline project, and you need to know that going in so that you can plan accordingly. Also, condemnation affects the cost. Oftentimes landowners don't agree to a pipeline easement because they want more money. The eminent domain process can be plus or minus there. When you figure the cost of legal assistance, your lawyers, the court cost, and then the amount that the court is going to award, or the commissioners are going to award to the landowner, all these things come into play, and right-of-way oftentimes has had experience there and can guide you relative to the cost. Lifespan of a pipeline, right-of-way is involved throughout the lifespan of a pipeline. We're obviously involved in the initial purchase of the rights of way, the rights that you're going to need to construct the pipeline. You're going to be involved in operations and maintenance throughout the life of the pipeline. What comes into play with operations and maintenance? Obviously, you have integrity digs that have to be done. You have right-of-way clearing that has to be done. All of those things involve right-of-way, who usually goes in and helps with the operations and maintenance folks to be the liaison between the landowner and the project. And then there's the release and abandonment phase, which many of us never see in the course of our working with a pipeline project, but it is there. The initial right-of-way process involves 4 steps, basically. This is before you can build your pipeline. Step 1 is typically title research, and title research takes several phases. Title research includes initially gathering the current ownership of the property, as well as the property description, so that your surveyors can go out on the property and know where the property corners are, be able to create the plats or GIS-based drawings that are needed for your acquisition. And title is a very specialized phase of the right-of-way industry. Survey permitting, obviously you have to have permission for your surveyors to go on property to get ready to design your route. And it not only includes getting that initial permission from the landowner, requesting permission from the landowner and obtaining it, but it also includes supporting the survey effort throughout the survey process. That means that right-of-way is usually the one that notifies the landowner that surveyors are going to be moving onto their property, and also works with the landowners in case surveyors do any damage while on their property. Damage by survey is not as prevalent as it once was, since most of it is done digitally now, rather than with a transit chain and range pole, which was very common back in the day. But we still have surveyors who tend to leave a gate open occasionally, and any cow that gets out is always the prime cow. So right-of-way is the one that winds up having to deal with the landowner to mitigate his damages that might be caused during the survey phase of a project. The thing that most people think about when they think about right-of-way is acquiring the land needed by the project, and it's negotiations with the landowner. Hopefully those negotiations are done in good faith, and that that they create an amicable relationship with the landowner, giving the landowner the information they need to make an informed decision about the easement area, about the activities that are going to go on during the construction and later on during the operations and maintenance of the pipeline system. Pardon me. During construction and damage settlements, right-of-way typically makes the notification of contractor entry and acts throughout the construction process as the liaison between landowners and the construction process, between the inspection group and the contractor that's doing the construction. Following construction, typically there are damages that must be paid. That's even if you have tried to make all damage payments prior to construction. Oftentimes when we're negotiating for an easement, we will try to go ahead and settle all anticipated damages, but oftentimes there are damages which occur that were not anticipated during the negotiation process. What is involved in the lifespan of a pipeline? The operation and maintenance phase is the longest phase. Pipeline may take a year to be built. It may be in operations for 50 years or longer. We are currently working on some maintenance and operations projects which involve pipes that were put in the 1920s. So the lifespan of the operations and maintenance phase of a pipeline, it can be very, very long. It would be very, you're always hopeful that right-of-way has established and maintains a great relationship with the landowners, because you're going to be living with them for a long, long time. A good relationship established in the beginning helps you through all of these other phases. DOT requires maintenance, including right-of-way and mowing. Integrity programs we've talked a little bit about, but smart pigging, oftentimes you're going to have to go in and remove anomalies that are discovered by the integrity programs. Right-of-way has to be involved there, because you have to, again, get permission from the landowner, or at least notification to the landowner of the activity that's going to be going on. And there are invariably damages that are involved with the integrity programs. Encroachment enforcement. This is one of the most important things I could tell you today. Please always have your company enforce their rights as far as that piece of ground is concerned, that easement area. What I mean by that, if you're not familiar with it, oftentimes landowners will build structures on top of the pipeline easement that make it impossible for the integrity programs to happen in that particular area. It's a safety hazard. It's a right that has been granted to you and that the company has paid for, and pipeline companies need to always be very conscientious about enforcing their encroachment rights. If your line flyers locate someone digging a swimming pool on your pipeline right of way, pay attention to it. If they're building a pole barn on top of your right of way, go out and have your right of way people or your operations and maintenance people let those landowners know that this is not acceptable. I've seen it throughout the years that many times when it comes to budgeting, pipeline companies will say, we will put off our encroachment enforcement until next year because it's not that important. It very well is that important. Pipeline companies need to enforce their encroachment rights. Line replacement, very common these days. There are more line upgrade, system upgrade, and line replacement projects going on now than there are long line pipeline construction projects. So oftentimes, if you're taking up and relaying a pipe, if you're doing general maintenance to a large area along a pipeline route, right-of-way needs to be involved, and they need to be involved for a number of reasons. You may or may not have the right to take up and relay a pipe. Your easement that was granted by the landowner may specify that that right is not available to you, that you have to renegotiate for it. So you need to be aware of those things. As I said, much of the work that's going on these days is in upgrades, system upgrades, and line replacements. A right-of-way is involved because revised easements are often needed. What if the easement you currently have does not allow you the space you need to put in that new line, that replacement line? You need to have a new agreement, and right-of-way is who needs to deal with the landowner to obtain that new agreement. And it's always important, again, to retain or remain in good relations with the landowner, and right-of-way oftentimes is the one who sets the stage for that good relationship. And then once again, during the maintenance activities, construction support is just like it is for construction of a new pipeline. Landowner liaison efforts with the landowner, construction support, damage payments, all those things that are applicable to new pipeline construction are also appropriate for line replacements or system upgrades. Release and abandonment of a pipeline system. That's maybe something you'll never encounter during your career, but it also can happen. And the easements that may be already on the property may specify that if the line is abandoned or is not in service for a particular amount of time, the line may have to be removed. You can't maybe just leave it there or pack it with nitrogen and leave it alone in place. So you need to know by the right-of-way records that you have for the easements that were taken, how that abandonment may be affected. And again, even if your company is going to stop using a particular line forever, abandon it for all practical purposes, the company still has intrinsic value in that strip of right-of-way. The company can sell that to another company who wants to put a pipeline in that area, or who wants to operate that existing line, or who wants to replace that existing line under the terms of the easement agreement with a new line. Or the easement may also specify that you have to return that strip of land to the landowner. You need to know that as you move forward. Some easement documents require that. Some even go so far as to say that the landowner must take up the pipe, cut it into particular lengths, and stack it on the side of the right-of-way. That's very uncommon, but it is out there, and a review of the existing easements is necessary in order to understand this. So what is an easement? An easement is the contract between the landowner and the pipeline company. And your company probably has a standard form easement, which the terms of which are usually fairly straightforward and simple. But many landowners and virtually all attorneys have their own form that they've used before, and that can become very difficult. The difference here might be that your company form may be 4 pages long or 3 pages long. Very simple, straightforward. I've seen forms, easement forms presented by landowner attorneys that were 27 pages long. So the contract can be very simple, straightforward, or it can be very difficult. And there's usually a lot of negotiation that goes into play if there's an attorney involved. We will accept this, we won't accept that. And they can vary also from state to state because different types of ownership are involved. For those of you who've worked in Louisiana, as well as some of the Midwestern states, you may be aware of some of the particular kinds of land ownership that are involved there. I don't have time here to go into detail, but there's quite a bit that's involved there. The elements of the easement document include identifying the parties. The grantor is the landowner, the grantee is your company, the pipeline company. Consideration as the amount that you're paying for that easement. 99% of the time, the dollar amount, the true dollar amount of the transaction is not included, and most states allow you to insert a consideration statement, something to the effect of $10 and other good and valuable considerations, rather than putting the actual dollar amount in. It may or may not include, the easement may or may not include how damages are to be settled. The granting provision is usually in the first or second paragraph, and it specifies what is being granted. You're being given the right to install one pipeline in a 50-foot easement with 20 feet of extra workspace or 100 feet of extra workspace. It may specify the size of the pipeline, but typically it is very clear in what is being granted. A pipeline for the transportation of natural gas, or it may say for all petroleum products, or it may say for anything. You may have the right to put salt water in it. There's always a property description involved in the easement document, and that in some states we still require plats. That means a plat is a signed, sealed picture and description provided by a registered land surveyor. Most states nowadays and most jurisdictions do not require signed, sealed plats at this time. Most of them use GIS-based drawings as the standard. That varies though, so your right-of-way people will be able to tell you which is required. And your company may require a plat, even when one is not typically required by law. Indemnification is a big issue. It's a legal issue, and it is always addressed in pipeline easements. A landowner's easement is going to want to say that anything that happens is your fault, pipeline. Whether we do it, whether you do it, whoever does it, if any damages are concerned, the pipeline company is responsible. Pipeline company, just on the other side of that, always wants to get rid of as much of the liability as possible by the indemnification clause. So oftentimes I've seen tracts go to condemnation simply because of the terms of a landowner's indemnification clause that was unacceptable to the pipeline company. Indemnification liability issues are huge, as you can imagine. Obviously, they have a date and signature, an acknowledgement, and it's recorded. The documents are recorded per state requirements. So it's available in the courthouse. General provisions, another big one is assignability. Most companies want to have the right to sell that asset to another company, and that's what assignability is. So the pipeline company typically wants to have the right to assign. Landowners typically want to, or many times want to have the ability to be advised of that assignment, or actually even to approve that assignment before it takes place. Talks about issues like ingress and egress. Where can you go on the property to install and maintain your pipeline? The depth of cover. There are certain federal and state and county requirements relative to depth of cover of line, but an easement may also provide that information, provide something in addition to the federal, state, or local requirement for depth of cover. Width of your permanent and temporary easement. You have 50 feet to put your pipe in, and you have an additional 50 feet for temporary workspace, or whatever it may be. That's typically detailed in your pipeline easement document. Also, things such as soil separation in agricultural areas. There are typically requirements for the soil to be separated, subsoil to topsoil. Damages, again, how is it to be restored? A certain type of seed mixture may be required by the easement document. And there's other things as well. Those of you who have been involved in pipelines may have seen some very detailed or very specific clauses that are included in the right-of-way agreement. Once again, the message that I would like for you to leave here with today is involve your right-of-way company or your right-of-way personnel, whether they're internal or whether they're contracted companies. Involve them very early in your project planning to avoid cost and timeline issues that may come up later. Ensure that your right-of-way group is an integral part of the project team. You're going to need them throughout the pipeline construction process, maintenance project, whatever you might be involved in. And let a right-of-way assist in the budget development. Just FYI, right-of-way, including the acquisition of right-of-way for the easement, the damages, and the right-of-way services associated with the project, we used to say typically ran 5 to 7%. These days, because of the cost, things have gone up considerably. So 7 to 10%, smaller pipe, it can be even a larger part of your budget. And involve right of way with the development of your project timeline. We're the first ones on the ground, we're the last ones to leave, so use us wisely. I'm sorry I've run a little bit over, but there we go.
Hi, everybody. I want to apologize for the technical difficulties some of you experienced at the beginning. We will be sending a link to the recording so that you can view the whole webinar at your convenience. We have some great questions, so let's get to them. The first one, Kerry, is why don't pipelines just condemn all tracks where they have the right?
Well, there's several good reasons why they don't. One is the fact, again, as I said in the presentation, you're going to have to live with these landowners for the duration of the pipe. You're going to have establish a good relationship there. You don't do that by condemning. Also, the cost of condemnation can be exorbitant. Legal fees typically run much higher than any of the right-of-way services that would be involved in getting a voluntary settlement. So it's really a financial issue. Plus, condemnation may well get in the way of your project timeline, depending on where you're condemning, whether it is in state or federal court, whether it's by a condemnation commission or through the actual court. So you need to talk to your right-of-way people before you make a decision of let's go ahead and condemn our way through the project just to get access as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Kerry. Our next question is, what are some of the consequences of not following through with encroachment enforcement?
The main thing, the most serious thing would be, well, there are two very serious things. Number one is that person that goes out there and decides he's going to put a swimming pool over the right-of-way without knowing the pipe is there. We all can imagine what happens when the backhoe digs into your pipeline that has 1,440 pounds of pressure on it. And I've seen that happen, and it's tragic, and it kills people. So if you're not paying attention to people, listen to your line flyers. When they report that they see activity on the pipe or above the pipeline, pay close attention to them. Another thing is that if someone builds a pole barn on top of your pipe, and then you need to do maintenance there, if you've had an integrity program where you find that you have to make a dig, what are you going to do about that structure that's been built on top of your pipeline? You're going to have to move it. That costs money. It costs time. So anytime you allow things to happen on your pipeline that people don't have the right to do, putting a new paved road over it, putting a parking lot on top of it, a paved parking lot, we've seen that. So all of these things are going to affect your ability to maintain and protect your pipeline, and it can be very costly and very time consuming.
All right, the next question is, what's wrong with paying whatever it takes to get the route planned by the company? Seems like it would save time and expense for hiring landmen to haggle with the landowners.
Well, I'll give you a good example. If any of you have ever worked in the Eagle Ford area and seen where the value of land has nothing to do with the price they're paying for pipelines, you'll understand. Worthless land in some areas, and every piece of land has value, obviously, but basically land that is worth nothing for anything where you couldn't graze a cow on 100 acres, now is demanding the price of $2 per inch of line. In other words, $2 per diameter inch. So if you've got a 20-inch pipeline, you'd be paying $40 a foot in many cases for the right to install that pipeline on the property, which is, if you calculate that out to the value per acre, you've got some $500 an acre land where an easement may cost $40,000 an acre. It totally throws the value of pipes for your company and for every other company that may follow you in that region out of kilter. It costs your industry terribly to do that. And the costs that you'll incur there are far in excess of what it would cost to pay for the right-of-way personnel in your company or a contract right-of-way company to negotiate a fair settlement with the landowners.
Thanks, Kerry. Our next question is from Niraj Gupta. Are there any specific right-of-way issues for CO2 pipelines compared to oil and gas lines?
Absolutely. CO2 and some other things are not granted the right of eminent domain in many cases. In fact, in most cases, in most jurisdictions. Oil and gas pipelines are generally more, find it easier to gain the right of eminent domain than it does for certain chemicals, hydrogen pipelines, for example, CO2 pipelines. All may not be able to get that right of eminent domain that's going to help them stay on the route that they're hoping to stay on. So yes, there are different rules depending on the type of line. And that varies by jurisdiction as well, by state to state typically.
All right, we've got some really great questions coming in. Keep them coming. The next one, Kerry, is how unique is the idea of separating mineral rights from surface rights and the world? And around the world, excuse me.
It's so common that mineral rights have been sold in areas where mineral development is common. I again go back, and I've had experience in a lot of places other than Texas, but Texas is the easiest example to give. As you know, the oil and gas industry has been active in Texas for over 100 years. And because of that, Many landowners, especially during times where there have been economic issues, have sold their mineral rights. So by selling their mineral rights, they no longer control the oil and gas that could be produced from under their property. And so I, again, would be very surprised if as much as 50% of the land in Texas includes both mineral and surface rights. What's the impact there other than not getting royalties on your minerals if they are produced? Well, I'll give you a good example of that. Well, I will not use the name I was going to give because that's probably not right. But for example, if you have a working ranch and you don't have mineral rights, however, someone does have mineral rights, they have the right to come in and drill a new oil well, for example, on your property, even though you may have stock on the property, you may have roads on the property, whatever, the mineral rights, the use of those mineral rights, or the taking advantage of the mineral right ownership often takes precedence over the surface rights. So you as a landowner of the surface rights may not have any choice but to allow somebody to come onto your property and drill an oil well or gas well, or take out coal, or whatever it might be.
Great. I think we have one last question from Jessica. I've seen it where the BLM denies the right-of-ways and there are limited areas to place a right-of-way. What is the best suggestion to resolve this?
The best suggestion is to involve the BLM or tribal groups or any state and federal land, federally owned land. Involve those people very early in your planning process so that you can develop your routing to accommodate what they're going to demand of you anyway. One of the very common things is, for example, the Appalachian Trail. You can't just put a pipeline anywhere you want across the Appalachian Trail. It's a very contentious issue. BLM lands in the West especially are an integral part of long line pipelines, because you may be crossing a new pipeline out in New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada. You may be crossing more BLM land than you are privately owned land. And so you better involve them very early, and you better establish and maintain an excellent relationship with those folks, because if you don't, you're going to pay for it in the long run.
Well, thank you, Kerry, so much for this wonderful presentation. And I want to thank everyone that submitted questions. Unfortunately, we were not able to get to all the questions, but we will have the video recording available for everyone to review again after this presentation today. So next, I wanted to highlight the 3 units that had an integral part in putting this wonderful program together. First is the Texas Engineering Executive Education Department. This department specializes in reskilling, upskilling companies' current workforce, either through our master's degree programs, graduate certificates, online or in-person training. So if you have a need around STEM education where you would like for us to provide training for your organization, feel free to contact us today. Next is the Petroleum Extension, or Petex. It's just been around for over 75 years, serving the oil and gas industry, either through e-modules, e-training, publications, in-person, or on-site training. And it could be around oil and gas training, it could be around pipelines, and this is the program where Kerry Malone, our speaker today, actually presents and provides more additional training around pipelines in. And last but not least is a research relations group. Research relations collaborates with companies to solve some of the world's biggest problems around water, emissions, technology, wireless communications, and many more topics. So if you would like to have a discovery conversation around research or collaborating with research, we'll love for you to contact the Research Relations Department of the Cockrell School of Engineering. All 3 units are here to serve you as providers in education, training, or research. So if you would like to better yourself or to reach your full potential with yourself individually or as a company, we would love to work with you to reach that. And next, I wanted to highlight our upcoming webinars. We have 3 upcoming webinars that we're really excited about. First is July 24th. We have an engineering leadership panel discussion around keeping the innovation engine running. The pandemic going on, a lot of companies have been very innovative and able to overcome some of the barriers they currently have in place. And so we're excited to kind of understand why this is happening. Why does it take a pandemic to kind of resolve some of these issues? And next, we'll have world-renowned speaker, Dr. Michael Weber, to talk about energy. Energy is always a hot topic, and he will give us his insights on global energy trends and their transition, and that's July 31st. And last but not least, we have Dr. Venkat Subramanian. He will be discussing about batteries and model-based battery management systems for current and next generation batteries. I know with Tesla's recent announcement of moving to Austin, this is going to be a great conversation. So we would love for you to join our future webinars, so mark them on your calendars today. So if you have any feedback on today's webinar or suggestions for future topics that we would like to talk about in TexTalks, feel free to fill out the survey following this presentation. Once again, we'd like to thank you for joining us today for the webinar series, TexTalks, from the Cockrell School of Engineering, Texas Engineering Executive Education, Petex, and the Research Relations. We want you to have a great weekend and hook 'em horns.